Okay, great. Thanks, Richard. So, yeah, living with CML and surviving cancer. My story actually starts an awful long time ago. My first cancer was 1988. And I learned from Dr. Ewan this morning that actually if my chances, if that had been CML in 88, were about 10% of still being here. But, yeah, I am still here, but that wasn't CML, although it all forms part of this story. So I'm diagnosed in 88 with a testicular tumour, and never been one for doing things simply. I managed to get 2 types of cancer cell in a tumour the size of a pea. I had the surgery, the spread was all negative, but my consultant said, just in case there's any microscopic metastases, we'll do some radiotherapy. And that has got to be, in my mind, one of the reasons I find myself standing here now, that radiotherapy may well be the root cause of my CML. I don't know, we never will know, but it's kind of easier to deal with if you've got something to hang your hat on and say that's what caused it. It's easier to deal with that than an uncertainty of why me. The other thing we discovered at that stage with me was that I'm very neutropenic. I always had been. So on a good day, my white blood count was half the lower end of the normal range. A white blood count over 2 was pretty good going for me. Neutrophils around about 1, so normal's 2 to 7.5. The hematologist had a good go at it, tried to investigate it. I had a bone marrow test at that stage, and they came to the conclusion, yeah, there is somebody at the very bottom end of the distribution, Alastair, and it's you. And okay, well, that was just the way I was. So that, just to finish that bit of the story, so for 3 years I monitored x-rays, blood tests, nothing happened. In retrospect, I lived life at that stage with a quite slightly short-term view. I'm 30, 31, I've just come out of a long-term relationship. I quite deliberately didn't re-establish a long-term relationship during that period. I got made redundant from a job. I took the redundancy money, I took my pension money and probably frittered it away a bit because there was still some uncertainty. And then it rather scrambled my brain 3 years down the track when my rather laconic Yorkshire, this was actually, I was living in Kent at the time, but my specialist was a Yorkshireman who said, well, Alastair, if anything occurs now, at least I'll get a decent paper out of you. Which I thought was deeply comforting. And I'm glad to say he's never had to write that paper. But it did kind of scramble my brain slightly, thinking, right, I need to readjust. So I readjusted, life went on. I met a crazy woman who married me. And then in 2007, we moved house. And the GP, when I moved up to the northeast, I went along and explained the history of the neutropenia, and he said, it'll take ages for me to get your records. We'll do a white cell count now, just to see what it is, so I've got a baseline on my system. Well, it came back and it was normal. I said, no, you've got it wrong. Haven't been normal for years. And a week later, it went 9, a week later it was 16, a week later it's 25, and we go, hang on, there's something going on here. So he referred me to the specialist in Durham. I went through all the usual tests, and I was diagnosed with a white count of 80, which is low compared to a lot of people, but that's where I was. So again, like Richard, straight on to 400 milligrams of Glyvec. My routine for taking the pills, I decided that making sure, I did enough reading to know that dose compliance was essential. And my routine was, the one thing I did very regularly every day was brush my teeth after breakfast. And I could tolerate it after a slice of toast. And so the Imatinib lived beside my toothbrush, and I took it after breakfast. So that was the way I'm not as good as Richard. I probably missed 1 or 2 doses a year. But well, that was kind of okay. I was doing okay. PCR was coming down. The targets that were talked about this morning didn't exist back in 2007, but we still were looking for it. I wasn't doing too badly, but my white cell count and my neutrophils were getting really low. My specialist in Durham was getting worried and actually wrote to Professor Clark about it at that stage sorry, Professor O'Brien, sorry, and there was a discussion, and I reduced to 200 milligrams of Imatinib. The white blood count went up slightly, but the PCR improvement stalled, and the balance of risk we went back to 400 milligrams. And so I'm at MMR at 15 months, and my first double zero, was 2 years in. So what was all that like? I had a bunch of side effects. I was more neutropenic than I had been, but it wasn't an issue. I wasn't suffering from infections. I carried some broad-spectrum antibiotics in case I got an infection, but the biggest problem was they used to go out of date. I'd be going away on holiday and suddenly find my antibiotics were out of date. Yeah, I'd suffered from cramp. I suffered from that gastric issue. My sense of taste and smell were definitely impacted. You know, I wasn't tasting some of the things in wine that my wife was tasting. But I did have the odd fatigue day. Our expression for it was I'd run out of petrol. There were just days that it was really like wading through a treacle. Some of my colleagues noticed it, but it wasn't a huge issue. And I did had the odd eye bleed. I think I probably had one a year through most of this period. But overall, I'm not doing too badly. I'm on the other side of the legal profession at this stage. I was national manager in the Forensic Science Service, so I'm doing a fairly high-pressured job, rushing around the country, and really being able to do that perfectly adequately despite the issues. I'm getting out and about. That's me and my wife in the middle of doing about 10 miles in Hamsterley Forest at Easter 2012, I think that was. And trying to keep a Springer Spaniel under control is quite a challenge. And around about the same time, that's me, sadly having been the runner-up in veteran gentlemen's doubles at Yarm Tennis Club. We lost the third set in a tie-break. It was deeply irritating. But, you know, given where I might have been, it wasn't too bad. So I thought about trying to go on Destiny at the time. I had some discussions with my consultant in Durham, but we were looking at moving house back to the northwest of England, where my wife's from. And because of that uncertainty, I didn't actually go ahead and try to get on the trial. So I'm now based near Chester, being seen at Countess of Chester by the consultant there. And once all that was reasonably stable, we started talking last year about dose reduction. And he corresponded with Professor Clark. And so almost exactly a year ago today, I cut my dose to 200 milligrams. So I'm on monthly PCRs. This is the protocol that's in Destiny. I'm not going to go through this in any detail because we're going to hear a lot more about that this afternoon. So 12 months is up next week. I'm going to see Dr. Pillai at Countess Chester on Wednesday. We'll do another PCR. If that is still a zero, or yeah, the 005 to me is the next best thing to a zero. It's not a number that concerns us. So sometime probably in the next month or so, I will look at stopping taking the pills. There won't be a packet of pills beside my toothbrush. The impact of this is quite interesting. I hope the chart comes out. This is my white cell count. So that's my white cell count over the last 3 years, and that's my neutrophils. And that line is where I've cut my dose. So they are both tracking upwards. I haven't been at a neutrophil count of 0.8 since I started 11 years ago. That's the highest neutrophil count I've ever had. So the reducing the dose has had a good positive impact on the neutropenia. I'm going to be really interested to see what happens, assuming that we get to stopping. What else? Yep, less gastric upset, fewer cramps. It's really irritating. If you're going out, we do quite a lot of hill walking. And if you're halfway over a stile and the leg that's in the air gets cramp in the hamstring, that's really not good. I've definitely got better, more sense of taste and smell. We're going to a wine tasting evening in a couple of weeks, and I think I'm going to do better than I have been over the last few years. I think there are fewer out of petrol days. Difficult to quantify, so we don't keep a track on it. And I certainly haven't in the last year had an eye bleed. So there has been a real improvement in side effects by going on to 200 milligrams, and that's really worked for me. Overall, I've been really lucky. This is people, but I think this audience might understand that more than some. I'm still here. I've had 2 rounds of cancer. I've done very well in getting 2 that you can manage, and you've got a good chance of surviving. I've been lucky to have people I can be really honest with about how I'm feeling. And I think it's also been important to be honest with myself. I come from, I'm the only member of my immediate family who's not a medic. And having that background made it easier for me to understand and have grown-up conversations with the consultants that I've dealt with, and I've been lucky in them, and they have been lucky in Durham having Professor O'Brien to talk to, and in Chester having Professor Clark to talk to, because both those gentlemen have had letters about me in the past. One of the odd things, and people who know me well find this slightly odd, it helped me think about how effective the treatment was being to actually visualise what was happening. When I was having the radiotherapy for the testicular cancer, I imagined X-rays coming in and just zapping cancer cells. When I was lying there under that machine, that was what was happening. The visualisation I got was for Imatinib was slightly different, because we had a dog at that stage, and it was like training a dog. So it was like the Imatinib going into my bone marrow and finding a cell that was about to do switch 9 and 22 and going, no! And exactly the way, that was the way my brain scrambled it. And I think that had an effect for me. I made a decision then that it wasn't going to dominate my life, that there were other things I had to do in life, but it was going to be one of those things I dealt with. I got a lot of support, and I now try to pay it back. Those of you who use the support group forum will see me writing on there and hopefully supporting people reasonably effectively. And I'm glad to do that. I'm really looking forward to the next stage. I'm looking forward to continuing that graph and seeing what happens. And I have found the support group really useful. I hope everybody else does. Lots of useful documentation outside. Go and help yourselves to those, if that. And I think that's probably about as much as is useful. Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much again to Richard and Alastair for some really insightful talks and for being generous enough to share their experiences with you. Both of them have said that they're happy to take questions over lunch if people want to go and ask them something, but I wasn't going to subject them to a kind of panel interview up here. So we'll move on.